biggest mistake I see every summer is people looking at their containers in late July and thinking the season is almost over. They stop planting, they stop caring, they tell themselves they will wait until next spring. What they do not realize is that they are throwing away one of the easiest and most rewarding harvests of the entire year. I used to make that same mistake myself until an older gardener quietly showed me something that completely changed the way I looked at container gardening. He smiled and said, "If your pots are empty in August, then you are wasting good soil, good sunlight, and good food." That stayed with me for years because he was absolutely right. If you know which vegetables still have enough time to grow before the weather turns cold, you can keep those containers producing fresh food long after many other gardens begin slowing down. You do not need expensive raised beds. You do not need a large backyard. You do not even need to buy special equipment. Most of what I'm going to share can be done with containers you already have sitting around your home. Old buckets, plastic tubs, large flower pots. They all work if you know one simple secret that most people completely ignore. I have been growing vegetables this way for many years, and I can honestly tell you that some of my favorite harvests have come from plants I almost never planted because I thought I was too late. The funny thing is that many vegetables actually enjoy the cooler days that arrive after the hottest part of summer. They grow steadier, they suffer less from heat, they often taste even better. Yet every year I watch people empty their containers and give up just when another growing season is quietly beginning. Today, I want to show you exactly what I plant before August begins and why these simple choices give me fresh vegetables well into autumn without spending much money at all. I will also share the one vegetable that almost nobody thinks about planting at this time, even though it has surprised me more than once with just how much it can produce. And that is where the real story begins. Many people think the only reason their late summer containers fail is because they planted too late. In my experience, that is almost never the real problem. The real problem is that they keep trying to grow the same vegetables that love the long, hot days of early summer. They fill a pot with tomatoes or peppers at the end of July and hope for another full season. Then, they become disappointed when the weather changes and the plants never really catch up. I learned many years ago that every season has its own vegetables, and once I stopped fighting nature, everything became much easier. I remember standing beside my containers one hot afternoon, wondering if I should simply empty them and call the year finished. An older neighbor walked over and asked me one simple question. Why would you throw away perfectly good growing space when the best part of the season is still waiting? At first I thought he was joking because everyone around me was already talking about cleaning their gardens instead of planting more. But he showed me several containers behind his shed that were full of fresh young vegetables while everyone else's pots were already looking tired. That was the day I understood something very important. Success in container gardening is often about timing rather than working harder. Most people waste money buying more fertilizer, more soil conditioners, and expensive plant food when what they really need is the right crop at the right moment. That is one reason I enjoy container gardening so much. If one crop finishes, I simply refresh the soil a little, remove the old roots, and plant something that actually enjoys the coming weather. It costs almost nothing, and the containers begin working for me again instead of sitting empty for months. There is another mistake that almost everyone makes at this point of the season. They believe every container must be completely emptied before planting again. That is not what I do. Unless the previous plants were badly diseased, I simply loosen the top. Few inches of soil mix, add a little homemade compost if I have it, and water the container deeply the day before planting. That simple habit has saved me both time and money for years, and the vegetables respond much better than most people expect. In just a moment, I will show you the first vegetable I never forget to plant before August begins, because every single year it reminds me why those old gardeners smiled when everyone else believed the season was already ending. The very first vegetable I always make room for before August arrives is bush beans. And I still smile every time I plant them because they have rescued more empty containers than any other crop I have ever grown. Most people think beans belong only in spring, but that is one of those old gardening mistakes that gets repeated year after year. Bush beans grow quickly, they do not ask for much, they are happy in containers, and if the weather stays warm for several more weeks, they often reward you with a harvest that feels almost unexpected. I remember one season when I nearly left several large pots sitting empty after pulling out my tired lettuce. Instead, I dropped a handful of bush bean seeds into each container, covered them with soil, watered them well, and almost forgot about them. A week later, little green shoots began appearing everywhere, and before long, those empty pots looked full of life again. That experience taught me something simple that I have never forgotten. Sometimes the easiest harvest comes from the crop that almost nobody thinks to plant. One thing I always do before sowing those seeds is give the container a good drink of water the day before. Dry soil often steals moisture away from fresh seeds and slows germination. Moist soil gives those young roots a much easier start. It is a small step, but it makes a noticeable difference. I also avoid adding large amounts of strong fertilizer because beans are not greedy plants. Too much feeding often gives you beautiful leaves instead of plenty of pods. That lesson took me several seasons to learn, but once I stopped trying to improve everything, the plants actually performed better. Another little habit that was shown to me many years ago is planting a few extra seeds rather than exactly the number you think you need. Nature always surprises us. A bird may pull one out. One seed may fail to sprout. Another may grow slower than the rest. Planting just a few more costs almost nothing, but usually gives a fuller, healthier container. Many gardeners rush through this part because they believe every seed will behave the same way. It rarely does. Patience and simple habits usually beat expensive products every time. But bush beans are only the beginning, because the next vegetable I always plant before August is one that grows even faster in containers, and many people already have the seeds sitting forgotten in a drawer without realizing they could still enjoy a fresh harvest before autumn arrives. The next vegetable I never skip before August begins is radishes, and I honestly think they deserve much more attention than they usually get. People often remember them only as an early spring crop, and that is a shame because many varieties grow beautifully when the hottest part of summer begins to fade. I have grown them in old buckets, flower pots, and even shallow storage containers that were ready to be thrown away. Every time I harvest those crisp roots, I remember how little effort they actually needed. The secret is not buying expensive seeds or special soil. The secret is giving them the right conditions when everyone else believes the growing season is almost over. I like to loosen the top layer of soil with my hands and remove any large roots left behind from the previous crop. Then I scatter the seeds with enough space that the young plants will not spend their energy fighting each other. Many people sow them far too thick because they think more seeds will mean more food. In reality, they often end up with plenty of leaves but very small roots. That was one of the first mistakes I made, and I repeated it for several years before an older gardener quietly laughed and told me that vegetables need room just like people do. Since then, I have always thinned the seedlings early, even though it feels difficult to pull out healthy little plants. The reward comes later when the remaining radishes grow larger, cleaner, and much more evenly. Another old habit that has served me well is watering consistently instead of heavily. I never let the soil stay dry for long because uneven watering often produces tough, cracked roots that are not nearly as pleasant to eat. A steady supply of moisture keeps them tender and helps them develop without stress. The wonderful thing about growing radishes in containers is that you can move the pots if the afternoon sun becomes too intense. That simple advantage often makes container gardeners more successful than people growing directly in the ground. You are not trapped by one location. You can follow the weather instead of fighting it. Best of all, many radish varieties mature surprisingly fast, which means they leave room for another planting before the season finally ends. That is something very few people take advantage of. They see one harvest as the finish line, while I see it as another opportunity. And there is one leafy vegetable that always follows my radishes because it seems to enjoy those cooler autumn days even more. And every year it reminds me why simple planning often beats working twice as hard. Another vegetable that I always make time for before August is spinach, and I think many gardeners overlook it because they remember how quickly it bolts during the heat of spring. What they forget is that spinach seems almost relieved when the hottest weeks begin to pass. Cooler nights and milder mornings give it the chance to grow slowly and produce tender leaves that taste much better than those rushed by summer heat. I usually wait until one crop has completely finished, then I gently remove the old plants without disturbing more soil than necessary. I spread a thin layer of homemade compost across the surface and mix it lightly with my hands. That is usually all the container needs. I do not believe every planting requires a shelf full of expensive products. Good soil that has already supported healthy vegetables still has plenty to offer if you treat it with a little care. One thing that was shown to me many years ago is to water the container first and sow the spinach seeds afterward rather than watering heavily over freshly planted seeds. It sounds like a small difference, but I have found that the seeds stay in place much better and germinate more evenly. Most people make the mistake of burying spinach too deeply because they worry the birds will find it. In reality, those tiny seeds only need a light covering of soil. If they are buried too far down, they often struggle before they ever reach the surface. Another habit that has saved me countless disappointments is planting a little every week instead of filling every container on the same day. Very few people do this because they want everything finished at once. I used to think the same way. Then I realized that one large planting also means one large harvest all at the same time. By sowing smaller amounts over several weeks, I enjoy fresh leaves for much longer and very little goes to waste. That simple rhythm has made my autumn garden feel productive without becoming overwhelming. There is another forgotten trick that I still use today. If a warm week suddenly returns, I simply move my containers into a place that receives afternoon shade. That small change often keeps the plants growing happily, while gardens planted directly in the ground begin struggling with the heat again. Container gardening gives us that freedom, and I think too many people forget how valuable it really is. But there is one final planting that I never leave out before August arrives, because it has become my quiet insurance policy for fresh harvests when many neighbors have already packed away their gardening tools. And that simple crop always surprises visitors the most. The last crop I always plant before August begins is leafy lettuce. And every year it reminds me that a productive garden is not about chasing the biggest vegetables, but about having fresh food ready whenever you need it. People stop thinking about lettuce once the summer heat arrives because they remember how quickly it turned bitter earlier in the season. That is exactly why I wait. As the days slowly become shorter and the nights begin cooling down, the plants often settle into a much happier rhythm. The leaves stay tender longer, and the flavor becomes noticeably sweeter. I like to choose loose leaf varieties because they keep giving instead of ending after one harvest. That simple choice has saved me both money and time for years. Instead of pulling up the whole plant, I simply pick the outer leaves and allow the center to continue growing. A few days later, there is another small harvest waiting. Then another. Before long, one container has provided fresh salads for weeks without needing to be replanted. An older gardener showed me this method many years ago, and I still smile every time I use it, because it feels almost too simple to work so well. Another mistake that I see almost every season is people placing every container in full sun from morning until evening because they believe vegetables always need as much sunlight as possible. During the hottest weeks, that often creates unnecessary stress. I usually move my lettuce containers where they receive bright morning sun and gentle afternoon shade. That small adjustment often keeps the leaves growing, while other gardeners wonder why theirs suddenly become tough or bitter. The beauty of containers is that nothing is permanent. If the weather changes, I simply move the pot instead of hoping the weather changes first. That flexibility is one of the greatest advantages of container gardening, and I never stop taking advantage of it. I also harvest regularly instead of waiting until every leaf becomes large. Frequent picking encourages fresh growth and keeps the plants producing much longer than many people expect. It is another one of those quiet habits that costs nothing but pays back again and again. When visitors ask how I still have fresh vegetables while many gardens already look tired, I usually tell them there is no secret at all. I simply try to work with the season instead of against it. But before we finish, there is one final lesson that ties all of these plantings together and completely changes the way many people think about container gardening once the middle of summer has passed. When I look back over all the years I have spent growing vegetables in containers, one lesson stands above everything else. The calendar does not decide when your garden is finished. Your decisions do. Every season I see empty pots sitting on patios and balconies while people are already thinking about next spring. Meanwhile, my containers are still full of fresh beans, crisp radishes, tender spinach, and bowls of lettuce that cost very little to grow. That is why I never rush to put my gardening tools away. I know there is still plenty of time left if I use it wisely. None of these vegetables require expensive equipment or complicated methods. Most of them grow happily in containers that many people already own. A little fresh compost, a careful watering routine, and choosing the right crops at the right moment are often all that is needed. I believe that is one of the reasons these old gardening methods have survived for so many years. They are simple enough for anyone to follow, and they continue to work season after season. There is something deeply satisfying about walking outside on a cool autumn morning and picking vegetables that many people assumed could no longer be grown. It reminds me that gardening is not about doing everything perfectly. It is about paying attention to nature and making small, steady decisions that add up over time. If this video encourages you to fill even one empty container instead of leaving it unused, then I think it has done its job. Start with one crop if that feels easier. Watch how quickly that container comes back to life and how much confidence it gives you. Next season, you will already know exactly what to do because you have seen the results with your own eyes. I still learn something new every year, and that is one of the reasons I never grow tired of gardening. Nature always has another lesson waiting for those who are willing to keep planting. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I truly hope your containers stay full long after many gardens begin slowing down. And the next time you look at an empty pot near the end of July, I hope you no longer see the end of the season. I hope you see another opportunity waiting to be planted, because there is one more forgotten autumn crop that deserves its own story, and I cannot wait to share that with you in the next video.